far away. Now I feel the wind blow outside the door.
You see the two towers, a huge explosion now, raining debris on all of us. We better get out of the way.
Then I was talking on the phone and the second building came down, and it was the most unbelievable sound you've ever heard. It sounded like a clap of thunder that went on for a minute.
This is an attack upon America. It's an attack upon our freedom and our way of life.
And there were people jumping off the top. I saw at least a handful of people just jump from 105, 108, way up at the top.
So Larry and I were in New York to produce a story that was supposed to air on the Today Show. It was about the world's first telesurgery. Surgeons in New York operated on a patient in France and removed her gallbladder. And we were there doing video production work. We started production on the 7th, several days before the attack. And one of the last shots that we got was of the World Trade Center from the AT&T World Headquarter building. It was part of our B-roll package to, show where we were. And it's got to be one of the last shots of the World Trade Center before it got attacked, that's for sure. We didn't have any idea at the time that, we were looking at something that would be gone in a week.
I was in Stephen's room where all the video equipment was, and I was logging video and getting ready to do a full day's work of production when the third person that was in our party, Juliana Minsky, walks in the door. And she says, "Guys, did you hear that the World Trade Center just got hit by an airplane?" So, of course, we turn on the TV, and this is about probably 3 minutes after the second plane is hit, so we don't really see it until we see replay. And that's when I said to myself, my God, we've just been hit by terrorists. We were in the Sheridan building on 53rd Street and 7th, so we were about 8 miles away. We didn't hear it, didn't see anything, too many tall buildings to see the smoke. So I think, like many other people, we were watching it on TV, seeing what was going on in disbelief and in horror, and kind of wondering what we should do next and walking around the room aimlessly.
I'm sure there were many thousands of people who were unable to reach people that they knew in the city because the phones just went immediately haywire. You couldn't, 1 minute you could get a landline call through, but no cell calls. Then the next you'd have cell phone service, but no landline service. And it went like that for the rest of the day, pretty much. You could barely get into the lobby. And once you were in the lobby, you couldn't get up any elevator in town unless you had rock solid ID for a reason to get up that elevator into that building. You weren't getting up. So the lobby of every building I went to was, the scene was the same.
I went out and I first started with a guy who was standing on a corner on a cell phone.
I'll wait a little bit longer, then I'll come down and meet you.
And he was talking on the phone and he stopped. He says, "Well, I'm waiting for my father to call me. He works in the World Trade Center."
Sadness, something good go on like this. It's catastrophic. That's it. It's like I said, just unbelievable, mind-blowing.
Angry yet?
Oh yeah, I was worried. There's a lot of people involved in this, innocent people.
I just pray to the people that are hurt and to those families and wish our leadership a lot of success in making the right decisions for the country today.
Are you angry yet?
I don't think I'm angry yet. I don't think it's sank in yet. But I'm sure we'll all get angry at one point or another.
I finally got my friend Rick on the phone, and he was shooting as the second plane hit the second tower, and he remarked that was when he really knew that it was a terrorist attack.
I was filming, and we filmed for about 20 minutes, and there were people jumping off the top. I saw at least a handful of people just jump from 105, 108, way up at the top. Then the second explosion happened, and I could feel the heat on my arm 10 blocks away.
But I think the most striking footage that he shot, and when I saw it the next day, it really struck me, was the smoke and debris and ash that covered his street. It was as if someone had turned the lights out at midday in Manhattan, and you could barely see out his window, and all you could see down in the street was a blanket of ash, pieces of paper fluttering through the trees, and a photographer or two, stopping for a second to shoot down his street.
Then I was talking on the phone, and the second building came down, and it was the most unbelievable sound you've ever heard. It sounded like a clap of thunder that went on for a minute. Just was unreal. I was talking on the phone, I just held the phone up and said, "You got to listen to this, the second tower's falling down." And all of a sudden, the sky turned black, and I closed all the windows, and a huge cloud of dust came by, like a tidal wave. It just came down the street like a bad monster movie.
First step right now, Marcia, is to make sure we do everything to help those people who need our support, and whether they're injured or still trapped in buildings. This is an attack upon America. It's an attack upon our freedom and our way of life, and we must retaliate and go after those who perpetuated this heinous crime against the people of America.
My biggest fear was actually that day after it was learned that the Pentagon was hit and that there were planes still in the air, and that there was talk that another plane was headed for New York City. And so we're all kind of looking up, not sure what was to come.
It was the most surreal view of New York you'll ever see. There were no cars, no cabs. We walked down the middle of 7th Avenue and Broadway and didn't see a car. And I think the one thing that struck me was how quiet it was. It was absolutely quiet.
We walked all the way down through Times Square, which was only about 6 blocks from where we were. And there, the people were still in stunned disbelief, looking up at the big screens, watching the ticker go by. And I just sort of reflected back to maybe what it was like, say, during World War II, the Pearl Harbor feeling, when people were getting all their information off the ticker. They didn't have the big screens then, but you still sort of got that taste of what it must have been like back then when people were getting the news flashes that way.
Is it getting better? Or do you feel the same? Will it make it easier on you now? You got someone to blame. You're sad. One love, one life. When it's one need in the night.
The whole city has got to deal with grief and just the human horror of someone killing with an airplane full of people. It's just a horrible moral issue.
Did I disappoint you?
Shaleem Khan was his name, and he was one of the nicest men we ever met in New York. He was happy to talk with us. Pakistani. He went to work in the morning. He was down in Lower Manhattan when it happened. He actually saw the second explosion. He went back home at 11 o'clock in the morning to be with his family, and then he decided that he couldn't do that. He had to leave and come back into the city and start working again.
I just came out again, about 1:30 again. I was, just trying to help people, because they're going place to place. I see no cabs around here, and it's a real chaos here, I was scared this morning, and I stopped working. I stopped working about 11 o'clock, and I said, it was choking me, when I hear 10:10, and it says, no, it can't be, I just stopped working, and that says, And then all of a sudden I said, no, let's go back to work again. You know, I get myself together.
So the people you've picked up today, have they been sort of like absent-minded, a little distant, reflective, kind of like not sure, in shock, that kind of thing?
Yeah, I mean, they are very shocked. They are very shocked, and truly they are. Some people I seen it with the mirror, the back view mirror, and they were shaken. And they were terrified. What happened? Because that was all of a sudden.
He had a lot to say about what it will mean to this world if we can't get along. If people of different races and different religions can't put aside their differences, we will never, in his words, get to where we're going. We'll never have a peaceful world.
Yeah, we feel like we are in a war zone now. I mean, the F-16 and F-14 flying all over the city, and feel like, you know, we're getting into the war, or we're just starting something like war. If somebody did it, I would say second minute we should retaliate.
The one thing that struck me, and this is an image I'll never forget, were the thousands and thousands of people walking north out of Lower Manhattan with everything they owned, in bags, in suitcases, backpacks. Just a crowd of people, so many people that the cab couldn't even cross several of the intersections that we needed to cross.
You can see behind me the Lincoln Tunnel is shut down, as is every other tunnel, and thousands of people are making their way to the west side of Manhattan, trying to figure out how they're going to get home.
When we were heading south towards Lower Manhattan, we saw a photographer from the Dallas Morning News named Evans Caglage. He was there to shoot pictures of a fashion show in the city. And of course, it was down in Lower Manhattan, and when this happened, his mission changed. How did it affect you?
At first, not bad. Not bad. Behind the camera, it's a bit of a shield, as you know, and I was just doing my work, concentrating on that. But yeah, once I saw that building fall, that got me.
You see the two towers, a huge explosion now, raining debris on all of us. We better get out of the way!
Then we got a little further. We got down to the area where New York University is. And we stopped and we talked with a professor who happened to just be outside of his apartment looking at the World Trade Center, the first one that collapsed.
And then I saw the smoke started to descend from the second tower, and the entire tower came down, collapsed. And looking at it, I knew I was looking at something that was actually occurring, that wasn't on videotape, that wasn't on film, that wasn't fictional, but real in my backyard. And I felt this feeling of pain, and I started to feel tears well up in my eyes. This was so overwhelming to see this enormous structure, this symbol of Manhattan, if you will, just fall down.
Lightning crashes, a new mother cries.
As we were heading further south, we got to about 10th and Broadway at the Grace Episcopal Church, and I stopped to talk with a Reverend David Ryder, who had just finished sort of preaching to the flock. And we talked to him about everything from how he was talking to his parishioners about anger and what the mission of the church was during this crisis.
As workers and those who were nearby streamed by here for 3 or 4 hours, it was like rush hour traffic going northbound. We've had people stop for prayer throughout the day. Our organist has been at the bench since 1:30, playing quietly. We just concluded a worship service. We just had, I would estimate, 300 people in there for prayers. Of course, in times of overwhelming pain and suffering, we do what we do best as people of God. We try to make sense of it. We deal with our angry feelings and our overwhelmed feelings and turn to Scripture. It's not the first time that evil's ever happened in this world. It's painfully a regular part of human existence. We'll try to make sense of it in that way, and we'll try to preach the gospel of a God who loves us and loves those who work to rescue through the night. We just had prayers for the doctors and nurses who will toil through this night, for the rescue workers, for loved ones who don't know the fate of their loved ones, and for those who have died. Fortunately, we have prayers and ways of offering that up to God, and that's what we do.
A Santa Barbara resident, her name is Nikki Falcone. She's an NYU student, and just wanted to check in with her, see how she was doing. And so we met up with her at about 14th and Broadway, and she had some pretty interesting things to say.
My mother couldn't get in touch with me for 3 hours, and my friends back home didn't know where I was, and the phones were down. I couldn't call them, so I wanted to tell them I was okay, and I couldn't, and that was really hard for me not to. The worst thing for a child away when they're scared is not to be able to hear their mother's voice. That's the worst part about being away. And when I didn't hear my mom's voice, I just felt really, really sad, and I really wanted to be home, and I really wanted to see my mom at that point for a couple hours there.
Does it change your feeling about living here?
No. When I moved here, I knew there was always going to be a risk, because New York is like the center of the world in a sense, so I always knew that it was a risk for terrorist attack. But I'd rather live here than anywhere else, although there's a risk. I just might think twice about working on the 80th floor,
Well, after I talked to you, I went down towards Ground Zero the next day, using my NYU ID. Got down as far as I could and took pictures. And the devastation was a lot. There were cars smashed, shoes, people's shoes just lying there. Just a lot of devastation, and that night there was a candlelight vigil in Washington Square Park. And there was hundreds and hundreds of people there, almost thousands of people just crying and lighting candles and singing songs about America. And it was very humbling, and it was very emotional. And I still wanted to stay in New York. But now this whole talk of war and things like that kind of made me feel like, well, maybe I need to be home with my family for a little while. There's a few pictures of us, the masks on. The smoke was a lot. The pictures just do not do it justice at all. The massive amount of smoke and debris that was around. The dust was about ankle high. There was papers everywhere, military everywhere. There was just a massive amount of destruction. It felt like a war zone. Now I know why the media calls it Ground Zero, because it really is like a Ground Zero. It's just destroyed. That area of New York is destroyed. For kids in this town, for it to hit home more, I would definitely just say to look at the pictures, look at the aftermath, the destruction, and put yourself in that place. Try to imagine what that must be like, to be there, to watch that, to see that live. But they can move on a lot easier than someone like I can, because that was my life. For 2 weeks, that was my life.
I think it was the next day at around 9:45 in the morning when 2 F-14s flew down the middle of 7th Avenue at 500 feet and scared the crap out of everybody in New York that it sank in. And I was literally in my hotel room on the 28th floor, braced for impact when I heard those jets go by. I was terrified. I left the city on Wednesday, took a train out of Penn Station and went out to Montauk, out onto Long Island, and stayed with a couple friends out there. And when I drove back into the city, it was amazing. The Midtown Tunnel had armored personnel carriers parked at the entrance. down to 2 lanes, checking every car that went through the tunnel, both directions, a real heavy National Guard and police presence, and it was surreal. I mean, that coupled with the air cover that the Air Force was flying overhead really made me feel like I was in a war zone. When I left the city for the final time on Saturday morning, it was with a lot of sadness. It really was. It was extremely sad to think that I was leaving behind this place that had been so scarred, so wounded, so hurt by the events of Tuesday. And that's when my emotions kicked in. That's when it really felt real to me, and the hurt kind of took over. And then to hear the songs that they were playing on the radio.
Despicable acts of terror. These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong. Today our nation saw evil, the very worst of human nature, and we responded with the best of America. Tonight I ask for your prayers for all those who grieve, for the children whose worlds have been shattered. America and our friends and allies join with all those who want peace and security in the world, and we stand together to win the war against terrorism.
Getting out of the city was something that I was really looking forward to. I was at this point ready to get home. And then as I drove further west through New Jersey and got into Pennsylvania, I ended up on the same Pennsylvania Turnpike that Stephen drove on, except he went the next day. I was seeing farmhouses with silos and fields of corn and kind of sort of this all-American kind of really good home feeling that things were going to be okay. It was that feeling that I'm not from California, I'm not from New York, but I'm from America.
This is a day when all Americans from every walk of life unite in our resolve for justice and peace.
She had